It was a Saturday night, and my friend Josh, my younger sister Megan, and I decided to try something different. Megan had seen several videos on TikTok about an app called Randonautica. Supposedly, it takes you to places based on an intention you set. It sounded somewhere between intriguing and silly, but it seemed like a good excuse to get out of the house. We were in the small town of Ashland, Oregon. There wasn't much to do there, especially at night, so the idea sounded fun. After some debate, we set our intention as mystery and pressed the button on the app. It generated a location about 5 miles from where we were, in a wooded area near a state park. Josh drove while Megan and I laughed, speculating about what we might find. The forest in that region was dense, and at night it had an oppressive presence. As soon as we parked, the mood shifted. I felt like the air had gotten heavier, but I brushed it off. After all, it was just an app. Nothing serious, right? The location was about a 15-minute walk along the trail. Armed with flashlights and our phones, we set out. The first few minutes were uneventful, but the deeper we went, the more isolated the trail became. The forest seemed to absorb sound. It was strange how even our footsteps sounded muffled. "This is so cliché," Megan joked. But I noticed she was gripping her flashlight more tightly. When we were about 50 meters from the marked spot, we found something out of place. A torn shirt hanging from a low branch. It didn't have any blood on it, but it looked recent, like someone had left it there not too long ago. Megan hesitated, but Josh laughed nervously. "Someone probably just lost it. No big deal," he said, but there was a forced tone in his voice. We kept walking until we reached the exact spot the app had marked. When we got there, the scene was surreal. On the ground, there were unlit candles forming an incomplete circle, and in the center, a fresh pile of dirt, as if someone had recently dug there. "See? Mystery solved. Someone probably just did some silly teenager ritual," Josh said, trying to sound relaxed. As he spoke, I heard the sound of branches snapping in the distance like someone walking through the woods. Megan froze, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound, but all I saw were trees. "Let's get out of here," Megan murmured. "Relax. It's probably just an animal," Josh replied, though he didn't sound confident. Suddenly, we heard another noise, this time closer. It was a low groan, followed by hurried footsteps that stopped abruptly. Josh whispered, "Who's there?" But there was no response. We headed back to the trail as quickly as we could without running. We were tense but trying not to show it. When we were just a few meters from the car, Megan stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" she asked. I hadn't heard anything, but Josh nodded. He pointed at the ground. There were fresh footprints, so clear you could see them even with the limited light. They weren't ours, and worse, they came from the opposite direction we had gone. We got in the car and drove off as fast as we could. On the way back, Josh suggested deleting the app, but when Megan opened her phone, there was a strange notification. "Did you enjoy what you found?" She screamed and tossed her phone into the back seat. We didn't talk much after that, and when we got home, none of us could sleep. The most unsettling thing happened 2 days later. Josh called me in the middle of the afternoon, sounding more scared than ever. He said he found fresh mud marks on the hood of his car like someone had pressed their hands there the night before. I started thinking about everything that had happened. Megan revealed something she hadn't told us before. As we were walking back to the car, she swore she saw someone moving between the trees following our steps. We hadn't noticed at the time because we were rushing, but when she looked back, she clearly saw a figure hiding behind a tree. The following week, even stranger things started happening. Megan reported feeling like she was being watched at home. Some nights, she would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced someone was in the yard. Josh, the most skeptical of us, wasn't spared either. One night he heard strange noises outside his bedroom window, and when he looked, he saw a single footprint in the snow, right below the window. We decided to meet up to try to figure out what might be going on. Megan suggested that maybe we had interrupted something in that forest, something we weren't supposed to see. Josh nervously dismissed the idea, but it was clear he was shaken too. As we were talking, I got a notification on my phone. It was from Randonautica. Why did you run away? I deleted the app immediately and told everyone to do the same. But a part of me knew the problem wasn't the app. It was something, or someone, that had been there in the forest that night. And the worst part? It seemed like it had followed us home. The last time we talked about it, Megan said something that still echoes in my mind. Do you think it was really a coincidence? The app took us there, but we're the ones who chose the intention. Since then, none of us have gone back to that forest and we avoid bringing it up. But sometimes when I'm alone, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to anything supernatural or mysterious. To me, everything had a logical explanation, but one night using the Randonautica app almost changed my mind forever. This experience happened about a year ago, and to this day I still can't explain what happened. It was a Friday night and I was with my roommate Mike and his girlfriend Jess. We lived in Spokane, Washington, a city surrounded by wooded areas and isolated spots. We were bored and wanted to do something different. Mike suggested using Randonautica, which he'd read about on Reddit. I agreed. It sounded like a fun way to kill time, even though I didn't expect anything interesting to happen. We decided that our intention would be adventure. The app generated a location about 6 miles from our house, in a more remote area near an abandoned field. We got into Mike's car and drove there. The road grew narrower and narrower, and at one point we had to park and continue on foot. The night was cold, and the wind made the trees creak eerily, adding to the tension of the moment. "Do you guys really think we'll find anything?" I asked, trying to hide my nervousness. "Maybe it's just some random spot, but you never know," Jess replied, adjusting her flashlight. The trail we followed didn't look very well used. Dry branches and leaves covered the ground, and the sound of our footsteps was the only thing breaking the silence. After about 10 minutes of walking, we reached the exact spot marked by the app. It was a clearing surrounded by tall, dark trees. In the center of the clearing, there was something we didn't expect: an old car, seemingly abandoned. The car was a 90s sedan, with peeling paint and fogged-up windows. It was covered in leaves and branches, as though it had been there for a long time. Mike, always curious, decided to get closer. Jess stayed back, holding my hand tightly. "Do you think it's safe?" she asked. "Probably. Looks like it's been here for decades," I replied, though something inside me was telling us to leave. Mike shone his flashlight into the car. "Hey, there's something in here," he said. When I got closer, I saw what he was talking about. In the back seat, there was an old, worn-out backpack, seemingly left behind. Mike opened the door with some difficulty, the creaking sound echoing through the clearing. "We shouldn't mess with that," Jess murmured, but Mike was already rummaging through the backpack. Inside, we found some personal items: an empty wallet, a notebook filled with scribbled notes, and a broken flashlight. The notebook had torn out pages, but on one of the remaining ones, there was a strange drawing, a circle with several marks around it, almost like a symbol. "What do you think this means?" Mike asked. "Nothing good," I replied, a shiver running down my spine. "Let's get out of here." Before we could head back to the trail, we heard a sound that made all of us freeze immediately. It was a crack, like someone stepping on a branch. We looked around but couldn't see anything. Jess whispered, "Maybe it's an animal." We decided not to stay and find out. As we moved away from the car, the sounds of snapping branches continued, always around us, as if something was following us. The faster we walked, the more frequent the sounds became. I started to feel like we weren't alone. When we finally reached Mike's car, we realized the situation had gotten worse. On the windshield, something was written, as if someone had used their finger to draw in the accumulated dust. The words were simple: "It's not just a game." Mike, visibly shaken, started the car quickly. No one said anything as he drove back home. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what had happened. When we got back, Jess insisted that we throw away the notebook and the other items, and we all agreed. We put everything in a dumpster far from the house and tried to move on. But things didn't stop there. That night, I woke up with a strange feeling. I looked out the window and saw a figure standing on the street directly in front of my house. It was tall and thin, but I couldn't make out its face. When I got up to take a closer look, the figure disappeared. The next morning I told Mike and Jess about it. They had also experienced strange things. Mike said he heard tapping on his bedroom window at 3 a.m., but when he looked, there was nothing there. Jess said her dog was restless all night, barking at the door as if something was outside. Weeks passed, but the feeling that something was off didn't go away. We decided to research the symbol we'd found in the notebook. We discovered that it was associated with stories of mysterious disappearances in the area. Some people believed it was used in rituals, while others said it was just a coincidence. Eventually, we decided to delete the app and avoid talking about what happened. But every now and then, we all feel the same thing, like we're being watched. To this day, I still think about the words written on the windshield. It's not just a game, and most of all, who wrote them. I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. I've always been practical, quick to dismiss ghost stories as nonsense or exaggeration. However, I've always had a fascination with unsolved mysteries. But after that night using Randonautica, I realized not everything has a simple explanation. Some things you have to experience to understand the true meaning of fear. It all started when my friend Lauren suggested we use the app. She had just watched a YouTube video about people discovering mysterious things and thought it would be fun. Our other friend Tyler agreed. I went along just so I wouldn't be the buzzkill of the group. It was a warm night in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the app generated a location about 10 minutes away by car, in a rural area outside the city. As Lauren suggested, our intention was to find something forgotten. The idea seemed silly, but as we drove farther from the city lights and into dark, poorly lit roads, I started to feel a mix of unease and excitement. We arrived at a dirt road, surrounded by tall, dark trees. The GPS indicated we'd have to walk about 15 minutes to reach the exact spot. Armed with flashlights and our phones, we started down the trail. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you notice the sound of your own footsteps. After a few minutes, something caught our attention. There was an old, small cabin beside the trail, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. The windows were broken, and the door hung off its hinges. Lauren, ever the adventurous one, suggested we explore it. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying not to sound like a coward. "This is exactly the kind of thing we wanted to find. Something forgotten," she replied, her smile looking just a bit forced. Tyler didn't hesitate and went in first, shining his flashlight inside. Lauren and I followed him. The place was empty, but the air carried a strange smell, a mix of mildew and something else I couldn't identify. The interior was small and simple, with just a table, a broken chair, and a rusted cabinet. On the floor there were strange marks, as if something heavy had been dragged across it recently. As we looked around, we heard a noise outside. It was the sound of a branch snapping, probably an animal, Tyler said, but I could tell he was tense. We decided to continue toward the location marked on the app. As we moved farther away from the cabin, the silence became even more unsettling. We reached the spot, a small clearing surrounded by trees. In the center, there was an old well partially covered by rotting wooden planks. "Wow, this is creepy," Lauren said, walking up to the well. The planks looked brittle, and you could see the deep, dark hole beneath. "We shouldn't mess with that," I suggested, feeling a chill I couldn't shake. But before I could stop her, Lauren kicked one of the planks aside, fully revealing the hole. "Look at this! It's bottomless!" she exclaimed, pointing her flashlight into it. The light only illuminated a few feet before being swallowed by the darkness. That's when we heard it. A low, drawn-out sound coming from deep within the well. It was somewhere between a groan and a sigh, but it sounded almost human. We froze in place, paralyzed by fear. "What was that?" Tyler asked. "Maybe it's just the wind," Lauren suggested, but her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Before we could decide what to do, we heard footsteps coming from the trail. They were slow and deliberate, getting closer. Instinctively, we turned off our flashlights and crouched down, trying to stay hidden. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. I couldn't see much, but I knew someone was there. Suddenly, faint lights appeared around the well. Flashlights. We saw at least 5 people dressed in dark clothing. They were carrying small bags and objects we couldn't make out. They began tossing these items into the well while murmuring something we couldn't understand. We were frozen, trying not to make a sound. One of them lifted a flashlight and shone it in our direction. We ducked quickly, holding our breath, praying they hadn't seen us. I glanced at Lauren and she was trembling with fear, her eyes wide with panic. Tyler was sweating, beads dripping down his face as he tried to stay still. The light moved away, back to the well, and I felt a small wave of relief. After a few minutes, the murmuring stopped. We heard the people walking away, their footsteps retreating down the trail. When we were sure it was safe, we quietly left the clearing and ran back down the trail as fast as we could without looking back. When we reached Tyler's car, we realized our hands were shaking. No one spoke as Tyler started the engine and sped back toward the city. After that night, we decided to delete Randonautica and never use it again. To this day, we still try to make sense of what those people were doing at that well. But one thing is for sure, we never want to be near something like that again. I've always been a curious guy, but I'll admit that the Randonautica app has always intrigued me. I'd seen stories online, people finding bizarre things, forgotten places, or having strange experiences. It was a Friday, and my friends Ethan and Sarah were at my place. We decided to try the app out of pure curiosity. Our only plan for the night was to find something unusual, as Ethan put it. Our intention was set to explore the unexplained, a vague idea, but the app seemed to understand. It directed us to a location about 20 minutes away on the outskirts of Portland, Maine. The area was more remote, near a forest none of us had ever been to. It was late autumn, and the trees were nearly bare, giving everything an even more desolate atmosphere. "Are you guys sure about this?" Sarah asked, staring at the GPS. The pin seemed to lead to the middle of nowhere. "Of course. The worst that can happen is we find nothing," Ethan replied, always the most confident of the group. We arrived at a small dirt parking lot, empty and surrounded by trees. We grabbed our flashlights and followed the trail indicated by the app. It said the point was about a 10-minute walk. The cold made our breaths visible in little white puffs, and the crunching of dry leaves beneath our feet was the only sound breaking the silence. We walked for a while, and the trail became increasingly isolated. Finally, we reached the marked spot. It was a small clearing with a leaf-covered floor and a few large rocks scattered around. At the center, there was something we definitely didn't expect to find: a black suitcase. "This is weird," Sarah said, stopping a few feet away from it. "Who would leave this here?" "Maybe someone lost it," Ethan suggested, though even he sounded hesitant. We approached it, shining our flashlights on the suitcase. It was closed but looked worn, like it had been there for some time. Ethan crouched down and, after glancing at me and Sarah, slowly unzipped it. Inside there were old, dirty clothes, but also other items: a broken flashlight, a notebook with a torn cover, and a photograph. I picked up the photo to look at it more closely. It was a Polaroid of a house surrounded by trees. It looked like a normal house, but something about it felt off. Under one of the trees there appeared to be a figure of a little girl, though it was hard to make out since the photo was worn with age. "This is giving me chills," Sarah said. "Don't you think we should leave?" "Wait, look over there," Ethan said, pointing ahead. There were more suitcases, backpacks, and bags scattered on the ground. There were at least 5 or 6, all in various states of decay. Some were open, revealing clothes, shoes, and personal items. The scene was absurd and deeply unsettling. "This isn't right," Sarah said, stepping back. "We need to leave now." I didn't argue. Something was definitely off about the whole situation. We started making our way back down the trail, trying to stay calm. The silence felt suffocating and the tension was palpable. When we were close to the car, we heard voices coming from the direction of the suitcases. We immediately turned off our flashlights and hid behind some trees. A group of 4 people appeared further down the trail, walking toward the clearing. At first glance, they seemed normal. Two of them were wearing red jackets, another had a baseball cap and a black jacket, and the other two were carrying backpacks. Their faces were shadowed and expressionless. "Who are they?" Sarah whispered, visibly terrified. "I don't know, but we're not sticking around to find out," Ethan replied, motioning for us to stay quiet until we reached the car. As soon as we got into the car, Ethan started the engine, and we sped away as quickly as possible. No one said a word until we were back in the city. When we finally stopped, Sarah broke the silence. "That group, they weren't normal. And those suitcases, something awful happened there." Ethan and I agreed. We decided to delete the app and never use it again. To this day, we avoid talking about what we saw. It was supposed to be just another boring night. My friend Alex and I were playing video games when he suggested we try something different. "Have you ever heard of Randonautica?" he asked. I had no idea what it was, but Alex seemed too excited to ignore. He explained that it was an app that generated random coordinates based on an intention you set. It sounded dumb, but I was bored enough to give it a shot. "Let's pick something scary," Alex suggested. We chose the intention fear and let the app do its thing. It gave us a location about 15 minutes away by car in a more remote part of the city. I agreed, and we got in the car. We drove to the spot, which was on a deserted road surrounded by fields and a few scattered trees. It was close to midnight with a full moon lighting up the path. We parked near a rusty gate. The GPS showed that the exact point was about 500 meters ahead, inside what seemed to be a wooded area. "I can't believe we're doing this," I said as we started down the trail. The place was eerily quiet. There weren't even insect sounds, which only made it feel stranger. As we walked, Alex pointed to something up ahead. It was a small cabin, or what was left of one. The walls were crumbling and part of the roof had caved in. It looked like no one had been there in decades. "This is where the fun begins," Alex said, trying to sound confident. But I could tell he was nervous too. As we got closer to the cabin, we noticed something strange. There were footprints on the ground, but they were uneven, almost as if whoever had made them was limping. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy, filled with the smell of rotting wood and something else, something sweet and nauseating. In the corner, there was a pile of random items, old clothes, worn-out shoes, and a broken flashlight. "Do you think this belongs to someone who lives here?" Alex asked, whispering. Before I could respond, we heard a sound outside. It was a loud snap, like a branch breaking under the weight of something. "Who's there?" Alex yelled, but there was no reply. We froze. My ears strained to catch any sound, and then we heard it again, slow, heavy footsteps coming from the trail we'd just walked. "I think we need to get out of here," I said, grabbing Alex's arm. He nodded, and we quietly moved out of the cabin. As we made our way back to the car, the sound of footsteps seemed to follow us. They weren't constant, they would stop and start again, but they always seemed to be getting closer. Finally, we reached the gate and saw the car. We sprinted the last stretch, jumped in, and locked the doors immediately. While Alex started the car, I glanced back toward the gate. That's when I saw it. A silhouette of a man standing in the shadows of the trees. I might be crazy, but I swear he was holding an axe. It all happened so quickly. Alex drove off as fast as he could, and on the way back, we decided not to tell anyone about what had happened. Since that night, I haven't used Randonautica again, and Alex promised never to open the app either. But I know that whatever we saw or whoever was following us is still out there.
Hello. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with your friends. This helps us grow and bring even more new content. Thank you, and see you next time.